Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into the Faroe Islands this time, specifically August 2024. Think of it as like a quick news roundup from way out there in the North Atlantic. We'll cover politics, some local news, sports, and even a little on the weather fair.
Sounds good.
So let's kick things off with the political scene.
Well, right off the bat, August 2nd, the Lagtingie, that's the Faroes parliament, got back to work after their summer break.
Back to business.
Yeah, and just a few days later, on August 5th, those EU fishing negotiations kicked off.
Those are always crucial for the Faroes, right? I mean, fishing is such a huge part of their economy.
Absolutely, yeah. And kind of on a related note, the government announced plans for a new nature conservation law on August 9th.
Always a balancing act, isn't it? Preserving those incredible landscapes while still allowing for development.
For sure. And then on August 14th, the never-ending issue of affordable housing popped up again.
Oh, right, yeah. Housing shortages are a global headache these days, it seems.
Tell me about it. And then on August 19th, the Gender Equality Commission made some noise about needing more women on committees.
Interesting. So kind of a mixed bag of topics there.
Oh, and almost forgot. Big news on the 23rd, the Prime Minister went on an official trip over to Denmark.
I see. Always interesting to see what comes out of those visits, potential collaborations, maybe some autonomy discussions. Who knows?
Absolutely. And then to wrap up the political month, there was that population migration survey that came out on the 28th. Always makes you wonder about the future of these islands, right? Where are things headed?
Definitely. Okay, so that's politics in a nutshell. But what about the economy? What was going on there in August?
Well, Bakkafrost, the salmon farming giant, they announced their half-year results on August 7th.
Oh, yeah. Big news for the Faroes economy, I bet. Those salmon farms are a major player.
For sure. And speaking of big news, Atlantic Airways started flying direct to New York on August 12th.
Wow. Direct flights to New York. That's a big step for the Faroes. Opens up all sorts of possibilities for travel and tourism.
Huge, yeah. And speaking of tourism, a brand new hotel opened in Tórshavn on the 16th.
I see. So they're definitely gearing up for more visitors.
Seems like it. And then just a few days later, on the 21st, the Chamber of Commerce held this big conference about green energy.
Interesting. Sustainability is such a hot topic globally. I'm curious how the Faroe Islands are approaching it.
For sure. And then on the 26th, reports showed that unemployment was still pretty low, which is good news for the economy overall. And at the very end of the month, news came out about new investments in the aquaculture industry.
Right, so even more growth in that sector. Okay, so lots happening on the business and economic front as well. But let's shift gears a bit. What about local news and cultural events? What were some of the big stories in August?
Well, August kicked off with the end of the Summer Festivaluren in Klaksvik. That was on the 1st.
Yeah, the Summer Festivaluren. Big music festival, right? Always seems to draw huge crowds.
Yeah, it's a major event for sure. Then on the 6th, a new book on Faroe's history came out.
Oh, wow. Always fascinating to see new perspectives on history emerge.
Yeah, definitely. And then on the 8th, the National Hospital held a special theme day all about elderly health.
Important topic. And on the 11th?
Faroe's Film Week. That was happening over at the Nordic House.
Right. It seems like there's a real push to promote Faroe's culture and art these days.
Definitely seems that way, yeah. Now, this one's a little less upbeat. On the 13th, there was an environmental protest against, I think it was a new development project they're planning.
I see. Always a bit of tension, isn't there? Development versus preservation. But anyway, what else?
The Føroyar Stevna, the big festival in Vestmanna, happened on the 17th. With all those boat races and traditional festivities, it's always a good time.
Always a vibrant display of Faroe's culture.
Absolutely. Then, on the 20th, some new anti-smoking measures were introduced.
I see.
And a few days later, on the 24th, Culture Days were taking place over in Fuglafjörður.
Another celebration of Faroe's art and traditions, it sounds like.
Right. And then finally, on the 27th, a research project was launched to look at how climate change is affecting the Faroe Islands.
Okay, so a pretty wide range of events. Really reflects the diversity of life there, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. A little something for everyone, it seems.
Now, before we move on, I'm curious about the weather in August. Just to set the scene.
Well, August is kind of a transitional month in the Faroes. Temperatures averaged around 10 degrees Celsius.
About 50 degrees Fahrenheit for those of us across the pond.
Right. But, it's important to remember that wind chill can make it feel a lot colder, especially if you're out along the coasts.
So layers are essential, even in the summer.
Yeah, pretty much. We had some sunny spells, but also, a fair amount of rain throughout the month.
Classic Faroe Islands weather, huh? Unpredictable.
You could say that again. It's part of the charm, though, right?
Ah, definitely adds to the adventure. Okay, so we've got this broad overview of August in the Faroe Islands, but now I want to zoom in a bit. Let's dig into some of those local news stories from KVF, the stuff that gives you a real feel for daily life on the islands. What were some of those stories that caught your eye?
Well, one that really stood out was about this community initiative in Torshavn. They're restoring a historic building. It just shows you how much people care about preserving their heritage. And it's a great example of that strong community spirit you find in the Faroes.
That's heartwarming to hear. It's those kind of stories that remind us of the power of collective action.
Absolutely. Oh, and this one was pretty cool. There was a group of students from the Faroe Islands who won some big international robotics competition. It's a testament to the talent and potential they have there, even in these really specialized fields.
That's fantastic. It's always inspiring to see young people excelling on a global stage. It shows what's possible.
For sure. And this next one, well, it's a bit of a heartwarming animal story. A sheepdog got lost, right? And after like a whole week, they finally found it and reunited it with its owner.
Oh, I love a happy ending.
Yeah.
And it speaks to the special bond people have with their animals, especially in places like the Faroes.
Absolutely. Okay, switching gears a bit. Transportation, always a big topic in the Faroe Islands. What with all those islands spread out? KVF had a report on discussions about improving ferry services.
Yeah, that makes sense. Reliable transportation is key for connecting those communities and, keeping the economy humming along.
For sure. And it sounds like they might introduce a new, bigger ferry soon to handle all the demand. It would make things easier for people to commute for work or visit family and friends on other islands. And of course, it would be a boost for tourism as well.
That sounds like a positive development.
Oh, and speaking of transportation, they also added a new electric bus to the public transportation system in Tórshavn.
Nice. Even a small step towards sustainability is a step in the right direction.
Right. Okay, now for something I know you'll appreciate, food. KVF did a feature on this trendy new restaurant in Tórshavn that's putting a modern twist on traditional Faroese cuisine. They're sourcing all their ingredients locally and creating these amazing, visually stunning dishes.
Oh, wow. That sounds incredible. I'm always up for trying local specialties when I travel. What are some of the typical dishes in Faroese cuisine?
Well, it's definitely unique. Think lots of fresh seafood, of course, but they also have things like dried fish, fermented lamb, and even puffin.
Puffin. Wow, that's pretty adventurous. I don't know if I'd be brave enough to try that. But it's fascinating how food reflects a culture's history and environment.
Definitely. It's all part of the experience. Anything else? Oh, yeah, there were a couple of other news items that I think are worth mentioning. First, there's this new initiative to boost tourism in the Faroe Islands, but with a focus on sustainable and responsible travel. Making sure they protect the environment and preserve the local culture.
That's great to hear. It's about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Sharing the beauty of a place without harming it.
Exactly. And finally, there was this really heartwarming article about this local group that's working to raise awareness about mental health issues. They're trying to reduce the stigma and encourage people to seek help when they need it.
That's incredibly important work. It shows a real commitment to the well-being of the community.
Absolutely. They're doing some really amazing things. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers all the major local news we saw from KVF in August.
Wow, that's a lot. I feel like we've gotten a really good glimpse into daily life in the Faroe Islands that month.
For sure. And there's always more to explore.
Always.
Mm.
But for now, let's take a step back and reflect on everything we've learned. From parliamentary sessions and economic reports to community initiatives and cultural events. It's been quite a whirlwind of information.
It has been. But like you said, it's given us a really good overview of what August 2024 was like in the Faroes. It paints a pretty vivid picture, I think.
It does. And before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, that population migration survey. I can't help but wonder how those trends are shaping the future of the Faroe Islands.
That's a great point. Those long-term population trends often tell a deeper story than any single news headline, don't they?
Exactly. I'm curious to hear what you've uncovered about those trends.
Well, we'll dive into that more in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore how those population shifts are impacting everything from housing and employment to cultural preservation and even the political discourse.
Sounds fascinating. I'm eager to hear what you found.
Stay tuned. We'll unpack all of that and more after the break. It's really interesting when you think about it. Those population trends are kind of like a hidden current running through all these events we've been talking about?
Right, yeah, it's like they set the stage, but we don't always see the whole picture.
Exactly. So let's break it down a bit. What exactly did that survey from August 28th reveal?
Yeah, what did it say?
Well, one thing that stood out was this slight but consistent trend of young people leaving the islands.
Makes sense, though, right? It happens in so many smaller communities. Young people go off seeking education, job opportunities, that sort of thing.
Yeah, pretty common pattern. But at the same time, get this, there's also a small but growing number of people from all sorts of different backgrounds moving to the Faroe Islands.
That's interesting. What do you think is drawing them there?
It's got to be a mix of things, right? Maybe the unique culture, the stunning natural beauty, and hey, the economy's been doing pretty well too. But, this influx of new folks brings up some interesting questions, like how do they integrate into Faroe society? What about housing? And how does this all impact the island's cultural identity, as it evolves over time?
It's a lot to consider, for sure. But let's bring it back to our listeners for a second. Why should they care about these population trends? What's the takeaway here?
Well, because these trends have ripple effects. They touch everything, from the political landscape to the art scene. Think about it. If fewer young people stay in the Faroes, it could impact the workforce down the road, the tax base, even the types of social services they'll need. But on the flip side, having more diversity brings in fresh ideas, new skills, and perspectives. It can enrich the islands in countless ways.
It's a reminder that even a place like the Faroe Islands, as remote as they seem, is still connected to these global trends.
Oh, absolutely. And those trends are constantly reshaping the islands, shaping their future.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Politics, economics, social issues, cultural happenings, and even those underlying population trends. I feel like we've pieced together a pretty thorough picture of what was happening in the Faroe Islands in August 2024.
Yeah, I think so too. It's like we've created this mosaic, each news item a tiny tile contributing to a larger, more complex image.
Exactly. But as with any good mosaic, there's always more detail to uncover. So for our listeners who are hooked and want to delve even deeper into any of these topics, what advice would you give them?
Go straight to the source, kvf.fo. That's the website for KVF, the Faroes National Broadcasting Service. You can search for specific articles using the dates and keywords we've mentioned. You'll find a treasure trove of information there.
Awesome, great advice. And speaking of going deeper, there's one aspect of the Faroe Islands that we haven't touched on yet. Their unique geographical and environmental context. Their location in the North Atlantic, those dramatic landscapes, their vulnerability to the forces of nature.
Right. That's such a crucial part of understanding the Faroe Islands. It shapes everything about them, from their economy to their cultural traditions. It's what makes them so unique.
Exactly. And it also highlights why issues like climate change and sustainable development are so critical to their future.
Couldn't agree more. It's a reminder that to truly grasp a place, you have to look beyond the headlines and consider those bigger forces at play.
Absolutely. And that's what makes the Faroe Islands so fascinating. They're this microcosm of the challenges and opportunities that island nations and coastal communities all over the world are facing right now.
Well said. It's like a glimpse into the future, in a way.
So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into August 2024, I'm left with this sense of awe for the resilience and adaptability of the Faroes people. They're navigating a complex world, finding that balance between tradition and progress, and forging their own unique path forward.
I couldn't have put it better myself. It's truly inspiring.
And it's been a privilege to share this journey of discovery with you. To our listeners, thank you for joining us. We hope this deep dive has sparked a new appreciation for the Faroe Islands and their remarkable story.
Absolutely. And maybe even inspired you to learn more.
Until next time, keep exploring.
As we've been talking about all these things that happened in August, I keep thinking back to that population migration survey that KVF mentioned.
It's a big deal, isn't it? Trying to understand what's happening in the Faroe Islands without considering those trends is it's like trying to read a book and skipping over all the character backstories.
That's a great way to put it. Those long-term population trends, they often tell us more than any single news story.
So let's dive into that a bit. What insights can we actually get from these trends?
Well, for example, that survey showed that there's been a slight but steady flow of young people leaving the islands to find education or jobs somewhere else. That brings up some questions about the future workforce in the Faroes, right? And also what it means for the long-term sustainability of some of their industries.
Makes sense. It's something that a lot of rural communities are dealing with these days.
Right, exactly. But here's the other side of that coin. There's a small but growing number of people from all over the world who are actually moving to the Faroe Islands.
It makes you wonder, what is it that's drawing them there?
Well, it's probably a combination of things. Maybe they're attracted to the unique culture or the incredible landscapes. Plus, their economy has been pretty strong lately. But of course, all these new people moving in, it raises a whole bunch of other questions. How do they fit into Faroe society? What about the need for more housing? And how does all of this affect the island's cultural identity as it changes over time?
So it's a complex situation. They need to find a balance between attracting new people and making sure that those who already live there are taken care of.
Absolutely. It's not just about how many people are coming and going. It's about understanding the reasons behind these changes. Why are people leaving? What are they looking for in other places? And what is it about the Faroe Islands that attracts newcomers?
It's about seeing the human side of those statistics.
Exactly. And that's what I find so interesting about what we're doing here. We're not just talking about news events. We're trying to uncover a deeper story about what's happening in the Faroe Islands.
And by doing that, we get a better understanding of where they are now and what their future might look like.
Right. So as we wrap up our look at August 2024, I want to leave you with a final thought.
Oh, I'm all ears.
Imagine for a moment that you're standing on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, the winds whipping around you, and you can see these amazing Faroes landscapes stretching out in front of you. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel?
It's a powerful image. I think I'd feel a sense of awe at the power of nature, and maybe also a sense of admiration for the people who have made these islands their home.
Exactly. I think within that awe, you can find a deeper truth about the Faroe Islands. They're a place where the old and the new come together, where the past shapes the present, and where the future depends on the choices that people make.
It makes you realize that even in today's world, where everything feels so connected, there are still places with unique cultures and ways of life that are worth preserving.
I agree. We need to appreciate and protect those things.
Well said. Thank you so much for being our guide on this deep dive. It's been really fascinating.
It was my pleasure. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us. We hope you've gained a new appreciation for the Faroe Islands and all that they have to offer.
Until next time, keep exploring.